Welcome, everybody. This is a continuing education session on a book I recently read called Factfullness by a Swedish doctor named Hans Rosling. Hans is not only a physician that has treated communities around the world, but he's also an international health professor and a founding member of Doctors Without Borders in Sweden, and also he started an organization called Gapminder, from which this a lot of this material is sourced. And he's been collecting health data around the world for many years and actually has been a very noted speaker. As a matter of fact, he is one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people. He's had presentations on TED and YouTube for years that have had over 35 million views. And he's had a very big impact on world organizations about realizing what's really going on in our world and how he paid attention to the real data that's actually out there that we so often miss. So here at the eve of his career, he actually wrote this book with his son and daughter-in-law, who helped him with some of the presentation materials, because they found that there were common reasons why people don't get the facts even when they've been exposed to them. So that's what we're going to be covering a little bit today. That's what a little bit had to do with the test that we took, and we're going to go ahead and start now. Now, this is a chart you may have seen before. You may have run across one of Hans's presentations. He's pretty noted for this, and that is to present the very vast amounts of data on a single chart with a bubble chart and sometimes over time. If you can look at this YouTube video down here at this link here, it shows him showing health data by country over the last couple of hundred years. Really, really fascinating. It's really a neat watch. Same thing, this tool that does this and creates this from data is actually available free from gapminder.org. So you can go there, change the axes, change the types of data, and then put it into motion. And for whatever amount of time it is available throughout history, you can watch how it's progressed over time. And it's really, really fascinating and a great research tool based on data pulled by major countries around the world. Much of it was funded by the United States, but is UN data sourced and so forth. They actually make it available so that countries and people around the world can make use of it. So we're going to be talking about the reasons why we tend to get things wrong, even though we have access to the facts, why we don't really know it. And we won't spend a whole lot of time on them, and I'll spend more time answering your questions about the pretest, but nonetheless, we'll hopefully learn a little bit about not only ourselves, also about the world, and also how to basically keep a better focus as a Stephen minister for our care receivers. The first instinct he talks about is the gap instinct. You probably have heard a term, the developing and developed world. And we often are in the developed world, and everybody or many others are in the developing world. And we probably remember those care commercials when we were kids, and how we were supposed to send money to Africa because all of them were barefoot and starving and so forth. Well, it's really not that way for the vast majority of anywhere in the world today. But it's easy to have that mindset. And so it's really easy to think that, oh, yeah, in the developing world, that's where big families are and many children die. And in the developed world, it's smaller families and hardly any children die. And that would be correct if we were still in 1965. But in fact, in 2017, the world's a much different place. Almost everybody is elevated to a great extent, and as a result, there really isn't two groups with a big gap in between. There is actually a continuum, if you will, and oftentimes these continuums actually have the majority in the middle. Now, it's not as strong in this particular case, but you can see it's more of a line and it's more of a continuum than it is a gap. And that's the mindset we got to get ourselves out of, is actually not assuming what the data is going to tell us, but actually looking. So that brings us to fact question number one. In all low-income countries across the world today, how many girls finish primary school? 20, 40, or 60%? Well, the answer is C, 60%. And you'll see that from all the different countries that Hans made this presentation to and gave this test to, and it was about 12,000 people over the years, literally everybody got this question wrong. So it's really unfortunate. And you'll notice that it'll be on this chart a little line. It's called, it has a little monkey face on it. These are chimpanzees, and he figures that if chimpanzees took his test, they would get at least questions right, at least 4 out of 12 right. What is by random. And in this case, almost everybody tends to think of it as no, there's no way that many girls are finishing primary school. The gap instinct. Fact question 2 also deals in this area. Where does the majority of the world population live? In low-income countries, middle-income countries, or high-income countries? People tend to do a little bit better with this, but in fact, the vast majority of people get it wrong still and perform worse than chimpanzees on this question. And the answer is middle-income countries. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. Instead of having two categories, rich or poor, West or everybody or the East, high income, low income, it really is more appropriate to say there's at least a little bit more granularity there. And Hans came up with this concept a couple of decades ago, where instead of using just $2 a day or $1 a day, is to actually put some dollars amounts in between a day that could help kind of show the distribution of the population of the world a little bit better, and also illustrate how those in those different levels are having a uniquely different life experience. And he turned out to be right. It turns out that the people that are in extreme poverty in level 1, yeah, they really do have it rough. It's just that there's not that many of them anymore, relatively speaking, to the overall size of the population. It's 1/7. Then there's a level between $2 and $8 a day, and that equates basically to between $730 a year at $2 a day to upwards of about $3,000 a year in income. And there's about 3 billion people at this level. And then between about 3,000 a year and 12,000 a year, there's about another 2 billion people at this level. And then, of course, above 12,000 a year, which of course is actually a little bit lower than our minimum wage, working 40 hours a week all year long, is level 4, where a lot of those of us in the United States reside. Now, this is a pretty dense chart here, but it highly illustrates what we're talking about and the differences between level 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm going to start over here on the right, and you'll notice that I have that same chart here down at the bottom, but instead it's going to also be an indicator for a column of level 1, level 2, level 3, and then level 4. And we're going to be talking about drinking water, transportation, cooking and eating and sleeping, and how it differs at these different levels. At level 1, drinking water is usually not nearby. Families are so poor they best own one bucket or one vessel, and they have to walk many miles to get it, and then walk many miles back to bring that bucket of water back. And since they only have one bucket, if they need more than one bucket's full, they have to go again for a second run. Their means of transportation is walking, and they oftentimes have no shoes. They cook outside, and they have to gather sticks or animal dung to burn, to build their fire so they can cook whatever substance there is around. Usually it has to do with root of some sort, of some vegetation, and it's made into a type of porridge, and this is the only meal they ever eat over and over again that sustains them, and they sleep on the floor. This is very typical of the life for 1 billion people still in this world. The good news is today this is the fewest number of people that have ever lived there at that level, percentage-wise. Level 2 is a lot better. There's a little bit more income going on. The family has ability to purchase more than one bucket, and they also have a means of transportation other than their feet, and that is that they have a bicycle. They're able to cook on a propane cooker, even though it's a very rudimentary one, so they're no longer having to hunt and gather sticks or dung. And then they're also able to actually purchase food that they did not gather. So it may not be a very high substance type of food, but at least it provides a little bit of variety, and they did not have to produce it all from the land. And they actually have some sort of bed, usually with a mattress of some sort, even though it might be used, it might be dirty, it might not have many coverings, but at least it's off the floor, and it's got some comfort involved. 3 billion people live at this level today. Now, level 3, people have plenty of access to water, usually at least a single tap, or not, if not at their housing location real close by. They also have a motorcycle. They have a multi-element ability to cook. They actually have a variety of things that they cook at each meal, like starches and vegetable, plant-based stuff. Oftentimes not very much meat still, but nonetheless a great variety and a very healthy meal to say the least. And they also have a more sophisticated bed, usually with nice linens, clean, up off the floor, of course, sturdy, steady, and for all members of the family. 2 billion people live at this level. And then for level 4, where many of us live that will be listening to this, because if you're either reading this book or looking at this video, more than likely you live on level 4. Well, um, you have hot and cold water in the tap in your house. You have a automobile, maybe used, but you have one that's functioning. You have an actual stove that has probably 4 burners and also an oven. And you also end up eating meals that have vegetables, starches, plant-based materials, and also meat oftentimes as a part of the meal. And your bed more than likely has a headboard, a footboard, and some type of nice linen set on it that at least has some kind of style and pleasing aesthetic to it. So you can see the difference, and each of these categories is dramatic. And so it's a significant thing to move from level 1 to level 2 to level 3, and level 3 to level 4. Now, let's talk a little bit about where these people live. You have the traditional pegs that represent a billion approximately, but we're going to get a little bit more granular by saying that each of these cubes represents 100 million people. Now, this is 800 million people at level 4. The same number that's at level 1. You'll notice that is only about 1.5 billion people out of 7. So the vast majority live in this middle area here in either level 2 right here or level 3. And you can see by the color coding, the green is for the Americas, Canada, North America, South America, Central America. Yellow is for the European and Russian areas. And then you have the Asian areas are in red, which are the most significant ones. And then, of course, the blue is the African countries on the African continent. And you can see that the African continent has representation in the lower 3 levels, and the Americas has representation, and Europe has representation in just the top 3 levels, and it's only Asia that has representation across them all. The gap instinct is one that oftentimes has to do with being categories done in averages, and unfortunately you have to look for the majority. You know, just having the polar ends is not really oftentimes a accurate picture of any group. Sure, there's always going to be people at the ends. Matter of fact, the people at the ends oftentimes tend to be more dramatic, and so they catch our attention more. They are on the news more, and they make better pictures and better stories. But the vast majority are oftentimes in between those 2 extremes. And so you have to watch out when you're comparing organizations or populations and so forth of averages, because an average really lumps people into a big area and just gives one number, and that doesn't really help us very well to understand a population or some occurrence of some sort. Also be aware of comparison extremes. Not all groups are at the bottom and not all are at the top. And so, you have to be aware idea that there's a kind of like a bell curve, if you will, of occurrences in every group, whether it's a Stephen Minister group or whether it's a church or whether it's a community or whether it's a police station, and how many people are mentally ill versus how many people are super healthy. I mean, that's really a bad thing to think about, but it happens. It happens. Every population has people in them of all different walks of life and circumstances. And the same thing goes for, when we think about it for our own lives, is that, thinking about people in 2 category designations really pivots us to a point of trying to go for simplicity over clarity. And so it's very, very important for us, instead of being judging and trying to find the key characteristic of a group, is actually to understand the group. And if we take time to understand the details, we'll find that we actually have more commonality than we actually thought. Same thing happens to us, as Stephen ministers. our care receivers, oftentimes are going through one of the worst times in their life. And, there's always more to the story. And they're only telling us so much early on. And as a result, it can be very frustrating for us at times. But for a while, it may seem like they're very, very, similar. Different than us. And we want them to be like us. And we want them to actually, get better. But, it turns out we're not really all that different from them already. They're just, unfortunately, at the moment, not being able to put their issue, their problem, their dilemma in its proper perspective. And they're hung up with it. And we're just there to be there along with them. We'll be much better off if we will be patient and as they unfold their story to us, and also see how we are very common to them in our walks. It's just that we're in a different place. The next instinct we'll talk about briefly, and most of the rest of them I'm going to talk about much more briefly, and focus on the questions a little bit more. Next one is fact question number 3. Over the last 20 years, what proportion of the world population is living in extreme poverty? Well, you probably have a little bit better idea now that I've described a few previous slides. A, almost doubled. B, remained more or less the same. Or C, almost half. And that's in the last 20 years. The chart below should help you with this. And the answer is C. So, what's happening in the world? It's actually getting much better in so many ways. But if you ask people what people think, around the world, the consensus is the same. Everybody tends to think, to some degree or another, of the majority of those respondents, that the world's getting worse. And it oftentimes has due to our access to media and being able to read, hear about incidences, having them reported for us, and how they're reported. And the things that are negative tend to attract us, get our attention. And that's what oftentimes draws us in. And it's not so much an evil, media or individuals. It's just that's what works. That's what sells. That's what, if you may have heard this a newspaper man in some movie or something say, if it bleeds, it leads. Well, it's because people want to read about it. They're drawn to it, whether it be for, attraction, or whether they're just trying to survival, wanting to learn about things that hopefully won't happen to them. Regardless of the reason, it's what happens. So that's oftentimes what people in the business of trying to get public attention and people paying attention and getting subscriptions will do. They'll tend to go negative to a certain degree in order to get our readership. Next question. Number 4, what is the life expectancy of the world today? 50, 60, or 70 years? Worldwide, it's over 70 years. So C is the correct answer. And we got lucky here, and it seems the people in the US and Canada actually do a little bit better than chimpanzees is getting this question right, about 43% of the time, while everybody else seems to fall behind. Now, the negativity instinct is one where, because we're drawn, we tend to think negative, we tend to buy into the idea that things are getting worse. Here's a Gallup poll that was done over a number of years, about 20 or some odd years, and where the perception of crime was that it was on the rise, with the exception of just a couple of years, whereas the actual reality is that in that area that they were polling, crime was actually going down with the exception of 5 years, 4 years that were level or even, and 1 year where it popped up just a little. But the entire population, and this was the United States population as a matter of fact, where crime, except for one little period where it popped up just a little, has been going down consistently. So, it's very easy for our perceptions and all those factors that tend to inhibit us actually seeing the facts, because we tend to lead with our feelings and get worked up when we hear stories and blow things out of proportion. So one of the things that's really important for us to remember is that if you're going to listen or watch the news, expect it to be bad. Why? Because that's what works for them. They're going to tell you things that are bad, that are alarming, things that upset you, things you should worry about, because that's what causes people to listen. But keep in mind that things can be both better and bad at the same time. Just because there's isolated instances of bad, probably the whole story is that whole arena of the subject matter is actually doing better today than it's ever done in history. Also, The old adage is, if it's good news, it's not news. It doesn't really sell. Gradual improvement's not news. More news does not equal more suffering. Sometimes certain stories get more news because they're more fear and negative based and draw you in better than others. Two different kinds of murders. One in Sweden is a case. In 1 week, one man was mauled by a bear, first time in 100 years. Not too far away, a man killed his entire family in a very grisly murder. There was a very, very small percentage about the grisly murder, but the one with the bear was a big story for months because it played into fears. It wasn't meaning that it was going to be, more opportunity for suffering or anything. No, that was just a very isolated incident, but it really played well, and so it got a lot more news. And then, of course, there's always the tendency for us to look at our own past and think things were rosy. Forget about the negative things. Think, the good old days, when we had no penicillin and ice cubes. How wonderful that was. Not really. So if we compare it to today, then we're getting all this information constantly about how bad things are, and we're remembering like things were not bad at all in the past, when in fact things were not too great back then. We're just not remembering oftentimes so well. So we tend to have selective memories, and of course we're also getting selectively bad reporting oftentimes, causing us to elicit some type of emotion instead of thinking about whether or not this makes sense or not, what I'm listening to. So it's up to us to pay a little bit more attention and read more, check things out, see if the data supports it. And the same thing, goes for our care receivers. They're very vulnerable. They're going through a rough time, and it can be sometimes a little bit of a downer, and we have to watch out for that. We have to expect them to be having a tough time, and it's not for them to cheer us up or to make us feel better. We're there to walk alongside them while they're going through their trial. So we are there to encourage them, of course, and it's also helpful just to take the time to take a closer look at the facts, help them to try to see the facts as well, and that they actually have things that are pretty good in their life. Even though they may have one area of their life that's not doing so well, if they open up the aperture a little bit and start seeing the whole perspective of their life, they'll notice that there's a lot of things to be grateful for. Question 5. There are 2 billion children in the world today, ages 0 to 15. How many children will there be in the year 2100, according to the UN? And the answer is C, 2 billion children. There's just not going to be a large increase of children. And the reason is that the world is becoming more affluent. One of the things you'll see on some of the charts is that as families move from level 1 to level 4, they start having less and less babies. Why? Because they aren't getting as sick. They don't die as much. They also don't need the child labor because they're not having to forage for their own food and the way to build fire and so forth. So with a combination of need and necessity, out of some reasons that so many children die in poor countries because of lack of hygiene and so forth, that once you get a little bit better practices, you don't need to have 8 children in order to have 4 grown children at the end of your life. You can just have 4 children, or 2.5, as many oftentimes end up electing to have. So, and data oftentimes doesn't fall into straight lines, and this is really the idea he's bringing here. If you look at this chart here, it looks like, oh my goodness, we're going to have 20 billion people before we know it, and that's just not the case. What's going to happen is it's going to trail off and be more like about 12 billion, in the next 25 or 40 years. So, but much like we're tracking the height of a young baby, if we continue to say, oh well, ever since during this first 6 months he's grown like a weed. If he keeps growing like this, he'll be like 7 feet tall by the time he's 4 years old. Well, of course that's not realistic, but it is easy to draw that conclusion if we don't watch out for the straight line effect. Question 6. The UN predicts that by 2100, the world population will have increased by another 4 billion people. What is the main reason? There will be more children below, A. B, there will be more adults, or C, there will be more very old people, age 75 or older. And B is correct. As I mentioned before, we're not going to increase children significantly, and older people are going to increase some, but it's going to be mainly adults that are increasing. And here in this chart on the lower right-hand corner, you can see incrementally how they're expecting that to occur over the next, looks like 60 years in 15-year increments, and taking us from about 7 billion to about 11 billion. So just watch out for straight lines. Be suspicious of data that's conveniently in straight lines. Usually that's going to be very isolated data. Oftentimes it's a very short period of time. And, it's just things don't stay the same. They aren't predictable. If your care receiver hasn't been one to, open up very much, doesn't mean they're not always going to open up. It doesn't mean that, they are always going to act the same. If they've canceled, they may actually get better over time and stop canceling so much. So, things don't necessarily stay the same. But nonetheless, even if they do, we're really there just to walk alongside them. It's not for us to fix them. It's not for us to provide the cure. We're just supposed to be there and provide, that encouragement, that support, and pray for them. And, even if they don't change, even if we don't get to see the fruit of that effort, believe me, it occurs. The fear instinct, another big one that keeps us from seeing data accurately. Question number 7, how did the number of deaths per year from natural disasters change over the last 100 years? More than doubled, and for A, B remained about the same, or the correct answer, decreased to less than half. Yes, despite what we think, in vast majority of instances, deaths and disasters are no longer a problem significantly for people in today's world. Deaths from disasters, deaths from plane crashes, deaths from battles, they're just all very, very low in comparison to the way they were 40, 50 years ago. The only area where there's actually an increase is actually in terrorism, obviously, and there is a jump in that activity. It affects people on level 1 the most, and on level 4 a little, but it's still, nowhere near like the change we're seeing here. And so we actually don't have much to be concerned about when it comes to that. And, that's the thing we have to think about. We're always being told things are much more riskier than they are and trying to get our attention by being frightening. But, there is a reality, and that is that, there is only a certain amount of things to have a healthy fear of. But the vast majority of things, we really have a lot of mitigations. We have medicines, we have safety practices, we have knowledge about things, we know how to read and how to see warning signs. And so, we really have a lot of things that protect us and help us to keep safe. Now, there is always risk, and it is good to be aware of dangers. But oftentimes you have to ask yourself when you become aware of a new danger, is my exposure really that significant? Is my exposure really that common? And a lot of times it takes just simple actions to minimize our exposure if there's anything we can do about it at all. So let's take the thing of terrorism. There's really not a lot you can do about terrorism. But, we live in a country that's got a pretty insulated, and probably our biggest risk is that we live close to a major airport in the city. But other than that, and there's not a lot more you can do about that other than maybe just move to Beaumont or something along that line. So, our risk of exposure there is really, really very minor. And hopefully not too many of us will spend much time being afraid of such a thing. So it's really important for us to just stay calm and just stick to the facts. Fear has a very, quite a number of acronyms associated with it, or acrostics. But false events appearing real is the one that sticks out most to me. And that's me in my head when I get a little worked up, start dreaming up stuff that isn't true, and I'm just fantasizing that it could happen. And the unfortunate thing is I experience it as I'm mentally making pictures of it and emotionally getting myself all worked up, and I couldn't even work myself up into a panic where I start making rash decisions. I start being grumpy. I start biting people's heads off, start making poor choices. And then a self-fulfilling prophecy, I could increase my risk to danger because I'm not paying attention. So it's really important to stay cool, and really stick to the facts. And the facts are, even with our situation with our care receivers, we are well trained, we are well supported, and no matter what goes on, our propensity and our ability to blow it and ruin somebody's life is almost zero. It just is because it's a well-designed ministry. So, don't worry about that. And if you do have concerns, share it with your supervisory group. Share it with your team lead if it's something that's really concerning you. And if it's something that you really think is an extreme red flag and you think you remember it from the training, call Matthew. I mean, they're always willing to help at his story coaching and counseling to help us out if we need a little feedback. Now, the question that oftentimes for those that were on phones weren't able to answer because they couldn't see the graphic, which one of these representations show where the roughly 7 billion people in the world today live, and the map that shows it best. And that map is A, where as we've seen, there's 1 billion in the Americas, 1 in Europe and Russia area, and then 1 in Africa, and then 3 in Asia and the Pacific Island areas. Now, it's not projected to grow in the same proportions over time. Over time, it's the Western countries right now, in 2017 is when this snapshot was taken, represent about 60% of the consumers at level 4. But level 4 is going to grow significantly, and that in the next 23 years is going to flip-flop, whereas people from non-Western countries are going to, then there will be the ones representing 60% of the level 4 consumers, and the people in the West, like Europe and the United States, we're going to be representing about 40%. So a day is going to come when we're a minority, not only in a global scale, but also, in our communities and so forth, by different ways, not necessarily by race, but by the types of consumers we are and so forth. So the dynamics are just simply changing, and they've been changing forever. And it may not be the most comfortable thing in the world, but the fact is we all are pretty pleasantly taken care of here on level 4, where I suspect most of us all reside. Last thing, the shift that's going to occur in the world and where they're going to be. You'll notice that we started off in level 4 in the upper right hand corner here with 800 million on level 4 and 800 million on level 1. The good news is, as you can see, in 23 years, that's going to fall by 300 million people. There's only going to be 500 million people, half a billion people left on level 1, and there's going to be almost over 1.5 billion on level 4. And of course, the majority is going to still be in the middle, but you'll notice that the shift is changing. Now, the majority on level 3 and not on level 2. So everything's getting better for everyone. So on the size instinct, a lot of times we try to get attention when you have a really big number. But until you compare it with something, it's really hard to put it into perspective. It may be an impressive number, it may not. A really unfortunate number is that there's still a huge, huge number, of which I can't quote accurately off the top of my head, of babies that die every year. I think it's something like 4.4 million. It's just an awful, awful large number. And yet, it's the lowest it's been since we've been keeping track. I think it's like 15 years ago, it was something like 10 million babies died each year. Isn't that awful? But you see, that's just it. Until you compare it, you can't imagine that 4 million and change would be, anything. It could be something you could be, excited about or grateful for. That's so few, it's fewer. But nonetheless, that's what happens to us. Big numbers are hard to take in. Same thing with really small numbers as well. If you're trying to figure out a long list, use the 80-20 rule. Look at what represents 80%. Usually there's going to be a very small number of categories that represents 80%, and that's where most of the problems will be. Most of the quality issues, most of the exaggerations, most of the inaccuracies. Same thing, can you divide that number? Can you do it by a person rate, by capita, etc.? That can, actually make more sense so that you can compare it and have an apples to apples comparison. Well, the size of someone's problems, we walk alongside, might be horrifying to us. We may have never gone through anything like what our care receivers gone through. And in the same vein, they may be going through something that seems so minor in comparison to what we've gone through. We have a hard time appreciating their suffering. You know, the issue is not whether or not it seems great or small to us. It's whether or not it is of something that's enabling the care receiver themselves. And so it's really for us to put aside what our perspective is and what we bring to the table and just walk alongside them. That way we're not judging, that way we're not horrified, we're not surprised, we're not diminishing. It doesn't even need to come into the conversation. It doesn't even need to even become a part of our thoughts. We're just here to encourage them, be there with them, pray for them, and they will be blessed by it. Fact question number 9. How many of the people's 1-year-olds today have been vaccinated against some disease? 20%, 50%, or 80%? And this requires refrigeration. And so many business people think, oh my goodness, there's no way that it could be a significant number. When in fact, the answer is 80%. And you'll notice that even people in finance industries and so forth, they even get it very, very wrong like everybody else. So it is a good news story. Generalization. When we generalize, we tend to overlook the facts and overlook the differences. And, that's just really an inaccurate thing to do. So we have to be mindful of, whenever we are referring to a large group of people, the people in another town, people in another country, people of another race, etc., people living on a different poverty level than us or socioeconomic level, etc. That group is not representative by just a few characteristics. There are a whole range of people within that group. And so we ought to look for the differences within a group and also look for the similarities between us and them. And that way we don't seem to dehumanize just down to a few characteristics by being reductionist. And, and also be aware of, being told that the majority are like this. Well, that may very well be, but that doesn't mean the minority don't count either. They're the parts of the difference. And the part of the commonality as well. And also, it's going to be the tendency for examples that are real vivid, that are real significant, that stand out to be pointed out to us. And the fact is that, those kinds of things happen in every community and every group of people. And so there's not necessarily all that much that's unique about them that we can't relate to. So oftentimes our care receivers are not much different than us. They just happen to be going through a trial at the moment. Fact question number 10. Worldwide, 30-year-old men have spent 10 years in school on average. How many years have women spent in the same age in school? 9 years, 6 years, or 3 years? And this was done for 30-year-old women around the world. And turns out worldwide, the average is that a 30-year-old woman has spent 9 years in school, just 1 year less than men. And this was actually a result of one of the preventative steps for bringing people out of extreme poverty and improving infant mortality. Because if you taught young girls to read and write, then they could read warning labels, they could read pamphlets, they could understand health instructions and how to keep their babies safe, and with signs and information, and they could be information about vaccines and so forth. So teaching little girls to read and write in the poorest places of the world is the most significant thing we can ever do to keep the majority of that population from their infants dying. It's great to put in hospitals, it's great to bring medicine, but they can only get to so many people because you can't put a hospital within a few hours walk of every village. But you can proliferate with teaching people to read and write. And that is a much more effective way of getting people out of level 1 and moving them up the out of their lower levels of poverty. Now, the destiny instinct has to do with seeing that, somebody or something or some region of the world or some cultures are doomed to have problems. This is often associated with the continent of Africa, how it's never going to change, it's always going to be awful, it's always going to be villages, etc. When in fact, there's 5 countries in Africa that have close to the same longevity of life expectancy as the United States. Tunisia, Egypt, Morocco, even Libya, and there's one other that escapes me off the moment. But that they are actually tracking much better than many of the other countries. But see, they're still part of Africa. Same thing with South Africa, much better than the rest. So, you know, we have to kind of think about, if we're thinking that something is doomed, that's really not the case. Look for things that are improvements in those areas. Try to update your knowledge, make sure that things haven't changed and that you're not different than what you thought before. And so, the same goes for us with our care receivers. You know, just because somebody has a bad attitude or hasn't shared or hasn't shown up for the last three meetings doesn't mean they're going to not show up for the fourth. Or maybe they'll do better by texting, or maybe they'll do better by talking on the phone. So there's lots of possibilities, and so we just kind of keep our mind open as much as possible. Fact question number 11. Tigers, giant pandas, and black rhinos were all listed as endangered in 1996. How many of these species are more critically endangered today? Two of them, one of them, or none of them? And the answer is none of them. And it's mainly because there's people out there that are, promoting and advocating for these different animals. And despite progress, despite, the disruption of habitats and so forth, there's lots of people out that get that message and, contribute and help. The only problem is what can happen in the single perspective instinct is that we can become too much close to an issue and we are too much of an expert, and so everything looks like the problem that we're trying to solve. And so sometimes we over exaggerate and we overemphasize the need and the urgency of something when in fact it is just the problem that it actually is. So what you'll find if you go out on the red list, or I think it's the wildlife fund website, you'll see how well each individual species is doing and what the progress is. And the fact is that we're doing an amazing job. Yes, there's lots of species that are still falling off, but there's still quite a few that are being saved that have been identified. So, we're making progress. Now, a single perspective can hit us in many ways, not only by being an expert, but just thinking that we are great. And in the United States, we have a very great sense of pride in our country and think that we have the best healthcare in the system in the world. But in the only way that we typically have the best healthcare is ours is one of the shiniest, and we spend the most money on it. We don't necessarily get the best results around the world. As a matter of fact, you might be alarmed to find out that and when it comes to lifespan, there's 39 countries that beat us as of 2014. And also 32 countries that have a lower infant mortality rate than the United States. And that's pretty embarrassing. Figuring that we spend almost twice as much as anyone else on our health care. So obviously, we may have got a lot of things right, but we still have some improvements to make to try to increase our life expectancy. Matter of fact, I think it's England that is supposed to gain another like 2.5 years in the next period of time. I think it's like 10 years or something like that, whereas the United States is only expected to gain about a half a year. So we're still not doing quite all the things we could do as some of our very close neighbors. So the thing about single perspective is you could be a PhD in something, but you may not be the right kind of PhD. You may not be the right kind of lawyer. You may not be the right kind of doctor. And, that right there can be a problem. I know that, I've had this case with my care receivers where I've had the kind of issue they've had, and I'm just dying because I think I know what that they need to hear. And I have to pull myself back, not talk so much, not be, because I'm not there to give advice. I'm there to encourage them on their journey, right? So encourage, be present, pray with them, and it may turn out, and it often does, where they take a different path, they go through different steps, and they come to a different place that is equally wonderful for their journey. So very, very, very interesting concept that I think is also applicable to us. Under the topic of blame, he asked the question, how many people in the world have some access to electricity, 20, 50, or 80%? The answer is 80%. And again, everybody performs less than chimpanzees. Hans talks about in some of his presentations how one of the most incremental and helpful things is getting a washing machine. When you get electricity, you can have light, and children can study at night. They don't have to forego studying because their chores take up their daylight hours. So there's just a lot of things that can occur with electricity. And under the topic of blame, oftentimes this is not a productive approach, and we ought to be spending our time looking at causes. And oftentimes, there are facts that we just don't like, we're having a hard time dealing with, and on a personal level, that's typically what's happening with our care receivers. They're not liking the facts. They're either having a hard time even admitting the facts exist, and that's what we do is we kind of sit alongside them and encourage them while they slowly or come to that realization that, oh, maybe I could do something different. Oh, maybe I could live my life a little differently, or choose to take a different path, or just choose not to focus on this anymore and start to focus on things that are maybe more important. So it sometimes takes a long time to do that, and encouragement can always help with that. So how did we do? Well, we looked at most of the questions now, and I will tell you that we did actually a little bit better than the overall large population that Hans normally speaks to. He typically had people that got 0 to 3 right, and that's where 80% of the respondents were. And then about 10% would be right there with random, with getting 4 right with the chimps, and then 10% would get better than that, and almost nobody would get 12. And we had one person who got 1 correct. We had 4 people that got 2 correct. We had 5 people that got 3 correct. We had 1 person that got 4, and then we had 1 person that got 6, and 1 person that got 7, and we had 1 bell ringer, and 1 person that got 8. So, and there's the key down here at the bottom. If you're wanting to take the test and come back and look at it, you can check it here on this slide. So we did well. We did real well. Our average was like about 3.5. So we were not quite to chimpanzees, but we were close. And the last question is 13 is about climate change, and is asked what. Think about this. It's not asking if it has happened. It's saying climate change experts believe that over the next 100 years, the average temperature will A, get warmer, B, remain the same, or C, get colder. And if you can see, this is the one question almost everybody got correctly, that there is great consensus that by experts, they believe it will get warmer over the next 100 years. So that was the exception of this question, and it highlighted that, sometimes things that have a very distant kind of reality to it is hard to feel much urgency about it. And that's one of the reasons why he highlighted this question with it. And so sometimes, it helps for us to really know the facts, because then we know where we are. We can know the circumstances and know if there's a reason to feel urgency or not, a reason to maybe reset our priorities. Because people that like to tell fortunes and push drastic action and say we have to buy right now and we need to act right now, oftentimes their positions aren't supported by the facts. And it's always going to be important for us to get fact-based information. And the Gapminder organization, it could be one of those, because they're going to base all their information on UN data that's been collected by very, very sound principles. If they don't have data themselves, they hire people, interviewers, train them to get the data in a certain way, and that really helps, for it to be reliable. For us, of course, helping our care receivers get to the facts is always a really important thing. But the urgency, of them getting better right away, sometimes that's what's caused them to recoil from everybody else. And we can patiently be with them, an hour a week, and not insist they get better right away. We just journey with them as they process, as they work up the courage, to possibly take on a different perspective, one that puts things in a little bit more appropriate position, and always, 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 of course, our best opportunity is to just focus on being the caregiver, not the caregiver. Here's a little wrap up about the authors. It turns out that the ones that were responsible for the graphics were Hans's son and daughter-in-law, and they actually even got scooped up by Google, and now Google actually has that software called now Trendalizer, and they actually work for them as a result. Hans unfortunately passed away in 2017. This was his life work. He worked on the book and actually had one of the final edited copies in his hands when he passed away not too long ago. So I hope you enjoyed the information. I hope you find it interesting, and I will also be posting this deck along with the video. Take care.